Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Booth and I'm the Communications Manager here at MorePay. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the topic for today, which is the cost of living crisis and how to support your employees. With inflation at a 30-year high and household bills continuing to rise, many employees are worried about their finances and are consequently looking to their employers for support. And whilst wages have risen in recent months, in many cases, they've also failed to keep pace with escalating prices. So this afternoon, our presenter, Michelle, is going to discuss a number of ways you can support your employees during this challenging time. A couple of things to cover off before we do get started. We absolutely want to hear from you throughout the webinar. So if you do have any questions, please drop them into the panel as shown here, and we will run through all of your questions at the end. We've had an incredible response to this webinar with nearly 1,000 people registering to join, so I imagine we'll have lots of questions. But Michelle will do her best to cover as many of these as she can. Another note, if you're facing technical difficulties, don't worry too much. We will be sending you all a recording. However, if you are facing technical difficulties, please do flag it in the question panel, because if lots of them come flooding in, then we'll know there's an issue and I'll do my best to fix it. So moving on to the agenda for this afternoon, we'll start with an overview of the cost of living crisis. Michelle will then examine in-work poverty in terms of how it's defined and what employers can do to help. She'll then talk you through financial wellbeing policies before looking at how you can help employees make their wages go further. Finally, in the section on supporting your employees, we'll look at how you can help employees who are suffering from financial anxiety, and also the business benefits of supporting your employees through the cost of living crisis. Before I hand over to Michelle, I'm conscious that we will have people on the webinar that aren't familiar with MorePay, so I'll give a very brief introduction. We provide payroll and HR software, as well as outsourcing services to UK businesses. We've been around since 1966, have all the accreditations you'd expect, and we're rated excellent on Trustpilot. Our promise is to make payroll and HR easy, and here's how we do it. We've built payroll and HR software that's easy. We deliver quality outsourcing options, and all of this means worry-free compliance for businesses. On the slide, you can see some of the businesses who trust us to take care of their payroll and HR. So now that's enough from us. Let's meet today's presenter. If you've attended some of our webinars in the past, you'll know Michelle well. Michelle's our HR Technology and Services Director and has been with MorePay since 2017. Michelle is CIPD qualified with over 18 years of both operational and strategic HR experience. I'll now hand over to Michelle, who will take you through today's webinar. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Hannah, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. It's a really interesting topic to get into, and when we were putting this together, I think it's probably one of the most interesting ones that we've done for quite some time, just in terms of how far reaching this is. And it's something that we are seeing daily in the press. It's on the news, it's in the newspapers, it's flooding our social media feeds. We're hearing about it in discussions with friends and families, the impact that this is having on them. But I think most importantly, even as individuals, it's something we are all experiencing, we are all feeling, and it's impacting us. But this is really just a chance to look at how you as employers can help your employees, knowing what they're going through and knowing this crisis that is happening. And you know, I guess the sort of thing is that maybe we're only at the beginning of this and we're not really quite sure how this is going to play out. So the earlier you start talking about this, start thinking about this and start thinking about what you can do, the better it's going to be for you. So just on to the next slide then, what I'd like to do is just run through some stats with you really to put this in context. UK inflation really has reached an all-time high. It's a huge 9% and it is growing. And this is leaving many people struggling to pay the bills. And just some other interesting stats that we've pulled out when we were thinking about this topic that I really think will resonate with people is that the boss of E.ON has stated that they believe that 40% of their customers will be in fuel poverty by October 2022. And and it's called on the government to help these struggling homes. That's a huge proportion of the population. And even those who aren't struggling to pay their bills and having to choose between food and heating, there's still an impact, which is meaning that their lives are different because they've got to find this extra money to pay the extra fuel bill. Michael Lewis is the E.ON boss, and he has just literally called this energy price rise as unprecedented. And it's also leading to a number of customers that they've got being in arrears, so that the problem out there is real. Another interesting statistic was around nursing and hospitals. And a nursing charity has seen an increase in workers asking for emergency financial help that's gone up by 140%. And this was something that was played out in the Independent. Alongside this, hospitals are actually setting up food banks for staff who are struggling with the cost of living. And it's just an example of one of the kind of professions that really are overall in financial crisis. And even compared to what happened in the pandemic, it's now that in this particular instance, it's people in the healthcare profession that are actually seeking help. And I think that's quite a startling statistic, actually. So on the next slide then, we're just going to talk about in work poverty, which it kind of does what it says on the tin, but it is a bit of a new concept. It's a very tricky situation for businesses to be in. How do you help employees who are struggling and facing financial difficulty, knowing everything we know about the cost of living increases, knowing about the fuel increased prices, knowing about the national insurance changes? How do we as businesses help employees when the plain fact is that you're probably as businesses facing in price hikes as well? This isn't just related to consumers, this is all businesses are relating to price hikes. How do you balance the two? And we'll talk more about this in work poverty. But I think the thing before that is to say that balance is the absolute key to this. There isn't a magic wand. There's certainly no magic money tree that I know people can go and just increase salaries, but there are things that you can do to combat this. And one thing that I would stress, and I will stress this all the way through, is that we don't think businesses should be ignoring this. It is something that is out there, and businesses should be tackling this early on. But essentially then, the summary on there is about in-work poverty, and this is when a working person's income after housing costs is less than 60% of the national average, which means they don't earn enough to meet the cost of living, and that means they are living in poverty. And it was estimated that in the UK, even before the current cost of living crisis, 1 in 8 workers were actually living within poverty. I think there's probably a number of factors, some of them work related, some of them not, that have meant it has been difficult for workers to come out of poverty, but it's becoming even more difficult now. There's this cost of living crisis, and some examples of that are low incomes, so pay rises are failing to keep up with those rising costs of living. There could be situations where there's poor job quality and employment practice, which is leading to people having financial instability, or could be trapping people in very low paid roles. A lack of flexible working practices. So, if you think about some of the responsibilities that people have outside of their jobs, that means they have to pay for things like childcare, or it might be carers for their elderly parents. If there's not able to be a balance, and they're having to pay even more and pay the rising costs on those kind of things. And then just financial hardship, which is caused by unforeseen setbacks in personal circumstances, a relationship breakdown, bereavement, illness. And it's basically trapping these employees that their income is falling at less than 60% of the national average once their housing costs, as it's said there. And I think we're just feeling this a lot more recently. So on to the next slide then. A little bit more about in-work poverty and what employers can do to help. And I think this is where we really get into the crux of it about what could help. Some of these may seem obvious, some of them may not, some of them you may be able to do and some of them may not. What we're trying to do with this webinar is just give you a flavour of the sorts of things that we could think about as businesses. And the first and most obvious one is to pay a fair and livable wage. Now, as I said, I caveat that with, I know it's difficult with rising costs for businesses as well, but a fair and livable wage gives employees the chance to lead a dignified life with access to opportunities and choices in which they need to I guess, fully participate in society. The real living wage across the UK is actually £9.90, and in London it's £11.05, so this is by hour. And just as a point of comparison, the minimum wage nationally is £9.18 and the national living wage is £9.50. So the real living wage is actually above that and takes into account sort of fluctuations at the time. And I guess overall the business benefits of paying something like the real living wage as opposed to minimum wage is kind of, there's multiple benefits to this, but it will improve the reputation of your organisation. It'll improve employee retention, help with employee relations, and generally will give you a more satisfied and productive workforce. We'll talk a little bit more about pay shortly, but I think it's important to talk about looking at how you could implement pay fairness. One of the easiest things to do, and I say easiest maybe in the sense of obvious, it's not always easy to do this, is to be transparent about the way pay is set so people understand how they can secure a pay rise, know where they could go next on a pay scale, and then communicating this across the organisation and being open and upfront. Ensuring that job vacancies clearly advertise salary and ranges. We still see an awful lot of jobs that are advertised without any indication of what the wage is, and that can lead for difficult conversations. It's particularly important when you're trying to attract talent at the moment, that you're kind of upfront and people know what the salary is. Another way is paying a wage that enables people to meet the true cost of living, taking into account what's going on at the moment, and then looking at ways to remove barriers to preventing people working the hours necessary to meet their financial needs. So if there are barriers in place, how do they work to meet their financial needs? And just ensure that pay outcomes and processes are really fair. Look at the processes that you've got, look at the pay review process. How is that worked out? How does it take into account external factors alongside internal factors, and make sure that that's all laid out. Another thing that you can do, and again we'll come on to talk about this in a bit more detail, is providing financial wellbeing support. So by offering things like employee benefits that help incomes go further, signposting them to financial advice and guidance, helping with debt management, having an EAP, creating a place where individuals can talk about money concerns, and this can make a real difference to people's lives. And it's kind of important to stress how you shouldn't underestimate this. A recent CIPD poll actually collected some data from around 2,500 employees, and it found that more than a quarter of them were saying that money problems were actually affecting their job performance. And this increased, really interestingly, to over a third of people were saying that money problems affected their job performance where they were earning less than £20,000. So the lower the salary, you would, as you probably would expect, the higher the impact this was having, and not just an impact on their life outside of work, but in terms of how they work. And a fifth of all those who were surveyed actually said that their financial struggles and concerns were affecting their sleep and general mental health. And you're going to feel the impact of this as businesses, and it is all around balancing this, but you're going to feel the impact of these employee stresses in terms of attendance, mood, productivity. And I guess that's why the majority of you are on this call, is that you understand that there's going to be an impact. So what are the options to do something about it? You can also look at things like supporting in work progression. So for someone living in poverty, a route to progress out of a low-paying job could actually be the light at the end of the tunnel for them. So what have you got in place that looks at career progression for people that you've maybe got in the lower paid jobs? Is there a route for them to take a next step? Are there jobs available? Do they understand it? Have they had the right training and support to be able to apply for these jobs? You know, that is something that you could just do in terms of giving options. What I do want to stress with this whole webinar is it isn't us just saying you need to increase everyone's base salary. That is obviously one option, but there are lots of other things that you can do. And it's looking at individuals and how you can help them do that. So on to the next part of this is more generalistic, really, about thinking about a financial wellbeing policy and how that could really help, and put in one place all the commitments that you as an organisation want to do and take into account how employees feel about it. And I think this is a really interesting way. So on the next slide, we're going to go through the elements of a financial wellbeing policy and then go into a little bit more detail. But it basically acknowledges that you as a business, you are income providers, and it's acknowledging that you are playing a vital role in your workers' financial wellbeing beyond the workplace. It could be a policy that's as simple as committing to signposting things like independent money debt guidance, offering access to low interest loans, running pension workshops. It could be things that you've already got in place or are looking to put in place, and you are just committing to putting the support out there. But there are chances and opportunities for you to go one step further and make it a more detailed and rounded financial wellbeing policy. But it should be something that's fed into an organisation's wider wellbeing strategy, because the two of these things are absolutely intrinsically linked. So the CIPD have put a lot of information out there about financial wellbeing policies that are really interesting. And the key things that the CIPD say you should call out in a financial wellbeing policy are signposting to financial wellbeing advice. So you may have internal things for your benefits provider, or you may be looking to bring in a benefits provider who could give them access. But there is a lot of free access out there, and it would just be as beneficial for you to point them in the direction of free access. So there's resources from places like the Money and Pension Service that small employers can access easily. There's other debt agencies out there, financial wellbeing agencies. So even if it's not something that you've got on your benefits package now or are looking to have, you could actually go out and do some quite decent, free, independent research so that you're signposting people to the right place. A really good way to do this is it isn't just about debt management and well-being, it's about targeted financial education. So a lot of the things that are happening to individuals, some of it comes from education, and education around how to manage money and trying to get ahead of them or any employees ending up in debt and the situation escalating. So that targeted financial education support is really important. And it's also really important to think about it at what point in their working life might they really need some proactive education. So if you think about maternity leave, paternity leave, adoption leave, a situation where an employee is going to take some leave and may take a drop in their salary dependent on what your policy is, how do you help them prepare for that? And especially at the moment, always a good time to look at your benefits package, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail shortly, and think about what finance-friendly initiatives that you could put in there. Flexible working policies and practices can also really help. So back to my point earlier, how can you help an employee balance their working hours so that they're earning enough money but not having to pay out for extra things? So this is things like childcare costs or costs of care for elderly parents. Is there a way that they could balance their work so that they're not having to pay out as much in those care fees? A general thing is around giving people security over their hours. And obviously some roles you're able to do this and some not, but where there is, you work in an industry where hours are fluctuating, is there anything you can do to give people security over what their hours will be, so they've got a bit more foresight of what salary they will be getting and when, and how that make them feel more secure. And then wherever possible, the last one that we'll leave this with from the CIPD is trying to pay employees at the real living wage. So to come on then to talk a little bit more about employee benefits, I think this is a really important part of it and shouldn't be underestimated. One, about putting benefits in place, but two, making sure that employees know everything there is to know about benefits, because I see it so often that businesses put in place a really good benefits package, and at the time that it's launched, there's quite a big sort of hurrah about it, and then maybe you don't keep talking about it. New starters might get a leaflet, they don't really know, and then all of a sudden you do a show of hands of who's gone onto the benefits portal recently, and it's, you know, a quarter of your workforce. So if we just go on to the next slide to look at how employees can help ease the burden with employee benefits. Now, there are lots of options of providers out there. There's, you know, ways that you can buy a complete suite of packages that gives you access to lots of different things. You can pick and choose what you want. This is just really to give you a bit of a flavour, but providing employee benefits that sit alongside an individual's salary is a real way to help them have more money in their pocket after you have paid them. So if you think about it in the concept of once you've paid the employee, you know, there's two kind of elements. One is when you're paying them, what can you help them get things like salary sacrifice from that's helping them overall? And then once you've given that money, is there any way that you could help them make that money go further, which is the second point on this slide. So just to talk in general about employee benefits, this is about giving preferential rates so that you can support your employees by offering things like health screening, life assurance, dental cover, eye care vouchers, free flu vaccinations, employee assistance programs, technology vouchers. There's a huge range of things that you can go on here, cycle to work scheme, childcare vouchers. A lot of these things have been around for a while, but I think now with the cost of living crisis, this is a time to look at what else can we do to help make our employees' money go further. But the key to this for me is once you've launched, you've figured out what it is, or if it's something you've launched a while ago, go back and talk about it now again and keep talking about it in the context of this cost of living crisis. The discount one's a really interesting one, and I always think this is a great thing to have for employees, and especially as technology's moved on and it's becoming so much easier for employees to access these kind of discounts on the move. And again, there are multiple ways that you can do this, but this is basically once you have paid your employee and they've got their net pay in their bank account, giving them access to a discount portal which will give discounts on restaurant vouchers, gyms, cards and cashback for all kinds of retailers, 20% off places, 2-for-1 offers. How are you going to make and help their money and their net pay go further? And things like this are not necessarily a huge outlay for you, but could have an absolutely huge benefit to the employees. So it isn't just looking at that one-dimensional, give people a pay increase and that will sort it out. One, it's not as easy as that, and two, that's not necessarily reality for most businesses. So just think about what options you've got for employee benefits, and if you have already got them, can you refresh them and re-energize them? Coming on to supporting your employees now. So there are the practical things that I've talked through, and I've touched on some of these areas. But just on the next slide, there's kind of an interesting statistic from a recent More Pay poll where we were asking businesses, what are you planning to do to support employees through the cost of living crisis? And actually, quite an astonishing 65% of respondents said they wouldn't actually be doing anything and didn't quite see it as an issue, or maybe didn't understand the impact that this will have on them as a business. 32% of respondents said that they'd be offering salary increases, which is great to see, and that's always a great way to make people feel that you're listening. But I hope some of the things that we've talked about, it's making sure that you know that's not the only way, because I think probably the startling statistic for me personally on here is that we didn't have anybody that said they were looking at their employee benefits or discount offering. So they were maybe just kind of thinking of the first stage. And all of this is around really helping us as businesses think about the wide variety of options out there. So the next slide then, I know I've given you a lot of information, and obviously we'll send these slides out so you can read back through them all, but what I wanted to do was give you a high level overview of all the options that are available to you and things just to really go away and start thinking about within your businesses. But there has to come the question, and it's a blatant question that needs answering. What will I get as a business in terms of a benefits for supporting employees, and how do we help? Yes, sorry, Hannah, we're on that slide yet, sorry. Yeah, how do we help support employees through this cost of living crisis? What does it mean for us? The first thing is really around loyalty and retention. So providing the right support, providing the right a reasonable pay, providing all the different options around it, this will lead to increased staff loyalty, improve retention. And the biggest thing at the moment is this will reduce your recruitment costs. The recruitment market is really, really difficult at the moment. There are so many candidates out there, and it can be difficult. So that the more people that you can keep in your organisation, the better it's going to be for you in the long run, and also will save you money. But with that will come a decent reputation as well, and that reputation will be viewed well in the marketplace. Access to financial wellbeing support and EAP and other things like that around education, that will give you a boost for your employees in their mental health and wellbeing. And I think that cannot be underestimated. The impact that this is having on people in terms of their productivity, in terms of how they are feeling, it's very difficult to kind of leave such a huge issue at home and it not impact your work. Not only will you see they will be feeling less stress, but that will lead then to sort of a greater engagement, morale, and that will boost productivity. And as I said before, the reputation of employers who are supporting their employees during the cost of living crisis will just find that they've got a much better representation. So if I just flip back, sorry, I missed out one slide when I was talking. So if I just flip back to the other slide, I want to make sure I cover that, which was around supporting employees. So, so just before I go on to questions, I do want to cover this. We've touched on some of this of how you can help employees in generally, but you may find that you have got employees who are really quite seriously suffering from financial anxiety, and some of these things will not go far enough. So it's just a placeholder really of the kind of other things that you could look at. So we've already talked about financial wellbeing, employee benefits, flexible working. There's just a couple of other things that I wanted to pull out. And one is, I mentioned this, but employee assistance program. Having access for your employees to a confidential advice line that can help them with a number of issues, whether it's, it could be something around debt, it could be something around an issue with their landlord over rent, which is causing them problems. It could be a range of things. Having access to that employee assistance program for an employee is really, really beneficial. And I think goes a long way to think that employees know that they've got a route and they've got somewhere confidentially that they can go to get support. Mental health first aiders is something that I would really advocate. We have them in our own organisations and we have done for a couple of years now, and I think that it brings a real sense of the company understanding what people are going through, and being very open and honest about wanting to support. But in this particular context, it is even more important to think about having mental health first aiders. And then the other thing is around open communication. I think, as I said at the beginning, it's finding that balance of how you help, but the one thing not to do is almost ignore the fact that there's a huge cost of living crisis going on that's affecting your employees. And obviously the fact that you're all on this webinar means you're certainly not intending to do that, which is great. And hopefully this has kind of given you some ideas of how you could work through that. So if I hand back to Hannah, we're going to go on to questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Michelle. So please do continue to drop your questions into the question panel. Starting with the first question we received. So first question was, we're unable to give across the board pay rises, so we're looking at other ways to attract new recruits and retain valued employees. You mentioned employee benefits, but what else would you recommend?
I think it's probably some of the things that I've already covered. Employee benefits really is a key one, and when you're looking to recruit new talent, there is certainly employees and candidates are looking for more than just the base salary. That is just one part of it. I think you can think about all the other aspects of support, culture that you can put in place, but then also think about the broader employee experience. So what opportunities are you giving people for growth, for progression? How can they see a real career path in the organisation? Other things that you can do around better work-life balance for candidates to attract them. Obviously, there's a lot of industries that have moved to hybrid working or working from home is the way that they'll be flexible. And even just things like, you know, what are the pension contributions? I think it's really important that when you're talking about a job to the marketplace, it isn't just about that base salary. It's the total reward package, and that's the kind of the financial hard facts, the benefits, and then all the other softer things that you can put around it.
That's great, thank you, Michelle. We have had a number of questions around salary increases. The next question is, current UK inflation rates are in excess of 6%, but we are not intending to apply increases anywhere near this percentage level as part of our annual review. How can we land the correct message and best manage employee expectations?
Open and honest communication is the key here. I think although employees know what the cost of living increase is, it is just about managing their expectations. So early, open and honest communication. And again, I'll bring it back to what else can you talk to them about with their total reward package or things that you can add in. When you're giving the annual increase, you need to be very clear about why you've arrived at that figure. You know, talking about where the business is potentially facing challenges as well from cost increases, but that you're finding a balance. So you can present the reasons for the figure that you come up with, be open, honest, clear and upfront about that, but then try and add into that extra things around it, whether it's the support, whether it's a benefits package, whether it's any additional earnings. There might be commission schemes that need reviving that people haven't looked at for a while, anything like that that you can bring alongside that pay conversation to make it a much broader one. But it is recognizing that you understand people are facing challenging situations. It isn't necessarily that you just have to jump to match inflation.
Thank you, Michelle. We've also had a number of questions around the employee benefit systems, and someone has asked, how do you compete with larger organisations that have the money for better benefits packages, rewards, salaries, that kind of thing? And I think that employee benefits is a brilliant example of that, because it doesn't just have to be for large organisations.
Yeah, absolutely not. You're right. There's lots of options for benefits providers, and there's a number of our More Pay customers who have benefits packages through us, which is targeted at the SMB market to make it more achievable for small businesses. I think there probably is a bit of a misconception that as a small business you can't have anywhere near the benefits package that a larger organisation, and it may be different, but even just picking off that one thing of a discounts portal could make a huge difference, and it shows that you're doing something, you're listening and you've reacted and you've responded, and kind of making sure that that's communicated out. So even just picking off one thing, yet you're not going to be like a huge global corporate organisation, but you are recognising the challenges that your employees are facing and acting accordingly and supporting them.
Thank you, Michelle. So moving on to the next question. The next question is that an employee has recently found out that their colleague who performs the same role as them and has recently started at the business is on a higher salary. So how should this be approached? What are the rules?
I wouldn't necessarily say there are rules, unless the caveat to that is if it is a potential unfair pay in terms of equality. So whatever I say, I caveat with that. The first thing you need to make sure is that these are two equal people. If there is a disparity in terms of equality, then I would certainly seek advice from either the MorePay team if you're a MorePay customer, or from whoever your HR or legal provider or team are. That's really important to point out. That aside, you do get situations where you have brought somebody newer in on a higher salary because potentially they're more experienced. And to bring in that extra experience, you've had to pay more, and these kind of things do happen. You're going to have to sit down and have an honest conversation with that employee. And I also think this is where sometimes pay bandings really help, so that there's a band of pay for particular jobs, and you can talk about how individuals sit within various points of that band based on their level of experience. But if there is a genuine sort of situation where it appears that they should be paid equally, the discrimination aspect aside, even if it's two kind of completely equal people and you think, then you just need to address it. But you need to face into it. It's always a very difficult conversation where salaries are involved. And as much as organisations often say to people, you know, don't talk about your salary, human beings talk.
Thank you, Michelle. That's really useful. We've got time for just a couple more questions. So the next question was, could offering financial wellbeing support be seen as overstepping a boundary between employees' work and their own private life?
It could be viewed by some people like that. I certainly couldn't account for how everyone would feel about that. But what you're doing is offering the help there, and then it's up to an employee whether they take that or not. It's about having the options available, and you may feel like there's one person who doesn't want to talk about it, it's nothing to do with anybody at work, and that's absolutely fine. But as long as everybody knows that the option's there, I would see that it's really important for us to potentially overcome those boundaries or things that might have held us back in the past. The truth is, in our society, it's probably a very British thing, is that people don't really talk about money and the impact that it's having. But I feel like it's being talked about a bit more now because of the actual physical impact that the national insurance increase has had. So when people open the pay slips in April, most people thought, oh gosh, that's less money. Then that was coupled with energy price rises. And as I said, there are some people at an extreme who are literally having to choose between food and heat. But even the people who aren't at that extreme, they've still got to find that money from somewhere, and I've got to think, okay, now I need to pay that extra, however much to my fuel bill, it needs to come from somewhere else. So everybody is feeling this at the moment, and I feel like it's become a more open topic, but I think you can still offer that support without overstepping the mark.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll just finish on a couple of questions. We've had a few more questions about the employee benefits. One person's asked about the tax schemes and what they involve, and then we've also had a couple of people ask about indications of the costs involved and how it works to provide a basic benefits and discount scheme. So we can come back to people with information on this after the webinar. We can provide you with further details and what have you. So I think, unless you've got anything else to add, Michelle, we will end the questions there. And like I say, we will be sending out a copy of the slides and also recording this afternoon.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think probably that's covered everything with some really good questions. Just a big thank you to everyone who's joined, and I hope you found it useful.
Yes, thank you to everyone who's joined and also everyone who's asked a question. So before we finish, I will just quickly point you in the direction of our Knowledge Centre. If you've not been on there already, you can find it in the main menu of our website. It's packed full with lots of useful resources. We list our upcoming webinars in there. There's lots of guides and everything is free to download. And in addition, we are always striving to improve our services, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's webinar. So when you leave the session, a very short survey will appear on your screen, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to complete this. So that's everything from us. I will be sending you an email this afternoon with the slides and the recording. Thank you very much for joining, and I do hope that you found it useful.